Well, it helps if I turn the mute button off. But welcome, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Storytelling Alchemist show. I'm excited about this show. This gentleman's talking about a subject that's very dear to me, and he breaks it down with a lot of details, a lot of great information. So we'll be, I'm sure, covering a little bit of that. But we're going to be talking about his book, The Physics of God, and we're going to be bringing on Joseph Selbie in just a second here. But just so you all remember, the show will be on the LA Tribune's Roku TV network probably in a couple days, and the archives will be on my YouTube channel as well. So much love, everybody, and I'm going to bring on Joseph. Hi, Joseph. How are you?
Very well, thank you, and hello to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. And I guess I'm pretty excited about this topic because it's something I've been, like I mentioned earlier, studying for 15, 16, well, since about 2004. So it's been a pretty, near and dear subject to my heart about, and you go into a lot of things. I was just even reading tonight again about how we talk about the programming that is given to us throughout our lives and keeps us from understanding. And I think you talk about the religion of science, and I can't remember the exact words of how you put it, but it's the religion of science and the science of religion. You break it down into, and the subject that kind of we're getting into and how to discover God and that kind of stuff. But you started off with a kind of an experience. That's what brought you down this road. Am I correct?
Yes. Well, I think like a lot of people in my generation, I experimented with hallucinogenic drugs, and I had quite a few experiences, but there was one standout experience that I've never looked back from, in a sense. And I felt absolutely wonderful during the experience. I was centered, I was happy, I was very aware of the people around me. I didn't have a lot of perceptual wildness, like seeing things that weren't there or anything of that nature. It really was much more a matter of how I felt inside. And I felt calm, I felt loving, and it went on for, I don't know, all night for sure. And the after effects stayed with me for several days. And I just loved it so much that it really was a turning point in my life, because I wanted to get back to that experience full time, so to speak. I wanted to find out how I could do that again. And even then I had a sense that because I'd had other hallucinogenic experiences that weren't good, they weren't necessarily bad, but they weren't that moving experience that I just had. So I didn't think the answer was, like Timothy Leary sort of said, is to, take even more psychedelics, stronger and more intense psychedelics, until you somehow transcend that way. I really didn't believe that was the way. So that turned me in the direction of meditation and going within to find that same experience.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned in the book too that the psychedelics may have triggered something in you, but it was something within you, or I can't remember the exact words, but you were basically prepared for this experience, or it was you and your connection, or it wasn't just the psychedelics.
Yeah, it wasn't the drug, it was me. The drug was just revealing to me, or making me able to be aware for even that short window of time of deeper realities within my own self. And that was really clear. I was really fortunate that I made that connection. And I figured if a drug could get me there, then there must be other ways that could get me there permanently, or at least more often, and with perhaps even deeper results.
Yeah, I've actually said to people before, you can do all those drugs, but I mean, meditation can take you there, which is what you described.
Yes. So I found my way to meditation even before I finished college, and that really took me step by step toward getting into spiritual teachings, particularly the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda, author of Autobiography of a Yogi. Many people have read that book. And that really opened me up even more to the possibilities of myself, really, and how meditation was the tool to get in there and discover the depth and breadth of what I was, who I was, what I really am. And that stayed with me till to today. I'm still meditating every day, almost 50 years later. And I was just saying the other day, I think I end every book, every talk, every conversation practically by urging people to meditate. That no matter what I say in this conversation, if you take nothing away from it, take away my heartfelt conviction that if you meditate, if you're not already, it'll change your life for the better. It is just the way to find out who you are in the deepest sense.
So basically, people don't have to they don't have to take psychedelics to get this experience.
No, although psychedelics are making a comeback, which is interesting to me. You've probably read, maybe you've had guests on to talk about it, that it's being used very clinically now, rather than the kind of just wide open experimentation that was taking place illegally when I took it. But it's being used in working with people who have deep psychological issues, and they have several people involved. They have their therapist, they have a person who administers the drug, they have a person there who's just there to be the safety valve. So it's very, very safe, very low dosage. But even with that, it's having remarkable effects on people because it allows them in that window of time that the psychoactive drug is working to get beyond their tension, to get past their trauma and glimpse a positive on the other side, and then sometimes even letting go of huge amounts of that built up tension. So it's starting to come back and be seen as a useful tool where it was kind of vilified for decades before.
I think that's because Timothy Leary did some major profound steps, but he also kind of pushed it in a time when people weren't as accepting. And then
he didn't really have much hope of getting past the Life magazine article, the infamous Life magazine article, which described people taking LSD and jumping out of windows because they thought they could fly, and having bad trips and then having flashbacks. Flashbacks was the big thing. If you take this once, you'll be out of control at times, like when you're driving a car, or it was just completely overblown. And in fact, almost everything in those articles was later found to be just nonsense, which is made up. But anyway, it's an interesting subject, but I don't want to get
it's interesting because I think you bring up a very important topic that even has to do with your subject. It's like what happens, because religion and science used to work together, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 years ago, 1,000 years ago. What, in your perspective, what happened? Because you talk about a good subject about how you're God in a sense, in your book, and I brought that up, and I said that in a sermon in a church probably about 15 years ago, and I think I was probably I'm surprised they didn't throw me out. It's one of those things where this is a subject that makes even today people very uncomfortable. Where do you think?
And I think that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is because people have a hard time making that leap, to embracing a sort of a fundamental philosophical, theological, mystical tenet, which is that we are gods, that we are souls made in the image of God, and then we have all those godlike qualities. It's really difficult for people who, have no experience with what I call experiential spirituality to jump to that and understand it. But if you can support that conjecture, if you can support that principle with science, a lot more people are willing to give it a open look and can be persuaded. As I used to say, I wrote this book for two kinds of people. I wrote this book for open-minded, science-oriented people who are not totally convinced that there is no God, but they have a hard time believing that there could be a God given what they know about science. So for them, I wanted to present a side of science or sides of science that supported rather than contradicted the potential for God. And then there's another group of people, which are people who are already enthusiastically embracing meditation and the belief system that kind of goes with it, that they can see how science actually supports what they believe. And they don't have to feel uncomfortable talking to, mom and dad or a cousin or friends they haven't seen in 15 years, that they can introduce what they're doing and support it with some solid basis of science behind it.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject because it's something that we've been touching on for years, in a sense. I think What the Bleak came out in 2003, and they touched on. They didn't come out and say you're God, but they came out and said our thoughts create, right?
Uh-huh.
and it was really challenging even for people. That was 20 years ago almost, and still I find it very fascinating. Even today, I think people are waking up to this, exactly your subject that you're talking about, a lot more than they did 20 years ago. But there's still some people that are, programmed, I guess, in a way to, see things just in a three-dimensional perspective, your three-dimensional body, your physical substances and stuff like that. So how does one practice? I know you talk about meditation, but how does one practice and get into meditation? Because one of the first things you say to somebody when you say meditation is start to freak out a little bit. They're like, I can't quiet my mind, I can't do that. And, how would you recommend somebody overcome that and move forward?
Well, that it is a challenge. I try to tell people that if you expect to be able to do anything without ever having practiced, you're delusional. If you expect to be able to play tennis really well without ever having played tennis before, if you expect to understand, a book without reading it, it can't happen. You do need to invest time. I kind of understand the intention of a lot of systems, people out there who will say things like even 2 minutes a day of meditation can do this, bring your blood pressure down, etc. And I hope it's successful, but I also wonder if by making it sound like a quick and easy thing to do, that they're just setting people up for failure. I think you need to approach it knowing that you're going to have to work at it a little bit. And one of the first things you're going to encounter, as you said, is it's difficult to sit still. It's uncomfortable to sit still for long periods of time. And that your mind races all over the place. You think about what you did today and yesterday, and that it just creates a whole string of this thought stimulates that thought, which stimulates that thought. And this is just normal for everyone. So you do have to put a little effort into it, but you don't have to meditate like I have for 50 years to get anything out of it. You don't have to have put really years in. You can have results in weeks to months, depending on your focus and determination to meditate. There are lots of techniques out there. I have one that I practice and teach that's called the hung saw technique. And there are others like them that are similar in that they suggest you watch your breath, because the mind tends to want to focus on something. If you don't give it something to focus on, it just goes all over. It's the monkey mind. But if you can get your mind engaged in just simply watching yourself breathe, even that can very soon have a deeply calming effect. And most importantly, and I think this is true for anything that people try to do, is that you have an experience that is satisfying. You have an experience that you want to have again. You release, you relax, your heart opens a little bit, even if it's a tiny bit. And then it makes it easier to keep at it, it's given you something. It's not all hard work. It's given you something. So simple techniques like the hung saw technique can bring that kind of experience fairly quickly. There are more advanced techniques, which I won't try to go into here, but if you start to get deeply into it, there are a lot of meditation techniques that can take you, and not so much just deeper, but they take you deeper and deeper in different ways that help you concentrate, for example, that help you open your heart, for example, and all of these can work together to give you these deeper experiences.
Yeah. Well, I think it also comes down to one important thing you say, working at it. And the average modern person, especially
Yes.
in the Western world, doesn't necessarily want to do that kind of work. They're hung up with their kids and their jobs and whatever priorities they have going on. And I know we have a viewer that just made a comment, said that's the number one thing that everyone says when I tell them to meditate is they try and they can't, and I tell them they have to keep trying. So, and I agree with that. You have to get out there and you have to put in the work.
Yeah, no, I've heard that same conversation that Linda just quoted myself 100 times, thousands of times, maybe, because I teach meditation often. I've taught it all over the world. And you might hear that same conversation in another context where somebody has come to learn to play the piano and they say, well, I tried it before and it was really hard and I gave up on it. So, you'll hear that conversation everywhere.
Yeah.
I just always hope and pray for people that they have that little bit of magic experience as soon as possible, because then they go, there's really something here that I liked feeling, and it helped me clear my mind, or it relaxed me physically, or it made me let go of some emotional tension I was feeling. And all you need is that once. And so that can happen. I have had it happen with meditation students. That happens the very first time they have a really powerful experience. But even if it's not powerful, sometimes that experience can keep you coming back. You realize there's value here. And also, let's face it, a lot of times people turn to meditation because they're having difficulties in their life. They're having health issues. They're not happy. They're tense, and they're not liking the way they feel day in and day out. And they may have tried to go a medical route, thinking that some kind of pill was going to take care of that. They may have tried other things that are good, like yoga, Pilates, running, but they may not have gotten what they wanted out of those, because I think in a way meditation is the essence of what you want. All those other things are indirect ways to what you want, where meditation is just sitting down and trying to feel and be aware of that which you really want to be. And it's just direct. You just go direct to that uplifting experience. And as I've said probably 5 times already, it can be life-changing. It is very transforming. But even if it's not that, it can be helpful. There are many, many people who I've met who meditate, and they say, yeah, I meditate. I don't meditate regularly, but I use it as a life tool. And it helps me in practical ways, helps me deal with stress at work, etc. So you don't even need to be committed like I became, and became a lifetime meditator for 50 years to get value out of it in the long run. Even in the long run, if you just do it a little, it will very much help you. And it's helping you know yourself.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important. I actually stopped calling it meditation with people. I started saying, what I want you to do is hang out with yourself for like 30 minutes and just breathe.
Yep.
And deep breaths.
Yep.
So, I think it's important to point out that you actually were not, this wasn't your world. Your family were scientists, am I correct? They were, or had a science background, I guess. And then you were
Yes. My story in college is kind of illustrative of how my life went. When I first started out at the University of Colorado in Boulder, I ended up majoring in microbiology. And at the time, Boulder had one of the premier departments for microbiology, and they had really good professors, and it was a hot new field, and I really loved it. It was the kind of early days of DNA and understanding how DNA replicated, and how it was this key part of every cell. And so it was exciting, and I was really, I could really see myself in that field, particularly doing research and hands-on, being involved. But then somewhere mid-college, it had a lot to do with that hallucinogenic experience I've already talked about. Science suddenly became very dry to me. It wasn't filling my heart. It wasn't making me excited anymore. And I made what might have been one of the most abrupt major changes ever. So I went from a major in microbiology to a major in Greek philosophy. Because I had become interested in Greece and Greek history, Greek philosophy for other reasons. And again, there was a very charismatic professor that taught the courses around that, several of them, in fact. But it was the conceptual framework of the philosophy that got me. So it was, instead of the minute step-by-step building blocks of science working its patient way towards trying to understand how reality is put together and thus our place in it, philosophy, and then eventually I drifted into Eastern religions, and of course with the meditation. But the philosophy of it really spoke to me, because it said more about who we are than science has at this point been able to do. But I've stayed with both of them. I've stuck with science in the sense that I followed it as a layman. I've read many, many books, both in the what are called the science and spirituality crossover kind of books, which were initially sort of put in motion by Fritjof Capra and his Tao of Physics book. But there's been hundreds of those books since then. But I've also followed what I think of more as hard science, just the discoveries in science, and kept up with it in that way. So I would call myself an advanced layman in science. I've in those early days in college, I was able to appreciate the mindset of a scientist and the approach of science and respect it. But then this other discovery through hallucinogenics and through the study of Eastern teachings and Western philosophical teachings, that really took my life into the direction of living in a spiritual community, getting deeper and deeper into not only meditation, but the teachings that surround it, and then teaching them myself. I traveled all over the world teaching for a while. I taught yoga and meditation, yoga philosophy in Europe, all over America, in India. And that was really quite satisfying to be able to share that with people. But I always stayed with the science. And in fact, many of the classes I would teach, beginner classes, I would bring in science. And I was inspired to do this because of the teachings that I knew from the autobiography of a yogi written by Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, because he brought science into everything. I mean, he was one of the first Indian teachers to come to America. And as he used to say, I didn't come to Indianize Americans, I came to spiritualize Americans. And in order for Americans and Westerners in general to embrace what he had to say, he felt that he needed to have it supported by science, because science was and remains to some degree the foundation of most people's beliefs about how reality is put together. So if he didn't connect those beliefs that come from science to these other experiences and beliefs that come from the spiritual side, he wasn't going to reach people. So I saw that really worked for me as well. And so I tended to teach that way. I tended to introduce connections between what science has discovered and what our own personal realities are like. So one area that is fruitful, and I cover a lot in the book, is quantum physics.
Yeah.
Quantum physics, unfortunately, is very popular for people who are teaching about subtle things to overuse it without understanding it. And you started to hear things like quantum reality. There really is no such thing as a quantum reality. If you know the science, that term doesn't make sense. But there is a lot in quantum physics that does back up the experiences you have in meditation and how you get to them. And a key one, and I won't try to go into them all, but a key one is non-locality. Non-locality is a really sort of awkward word, frankly. It's like you're starting off with a double negative sort of thing. So non-locality came into quantum physics to describe behaviors that were observed on a quantum level that don't happen in our local familiar world, in our three-dimensional physical world, in the universe made of matter and energy. And those things are things like entanglement and the intelligent observer effect. And what they had to come to as a fundamental tenet of quantum physics is that there is a realm, there is a reality beyond the local physical reality that operates with its own rules, with its own non-local rules. And those non-local rules are, as I already said, things like entanglement, where things can seemingly defy the speed of light, which within the context of our universe, nothing can go faster than the speed of light. But in the context of there being this other subtler realm of non-locality, things can essentially break the speed of light. And I don't say that unequivocally, because there's more to be explained in that situation to really say what it is. But when you take those findings in science and you say the subtle parts of you, the parts of you that are more your soul and your mind, that defy easy descriptions from a matter and energy only point of view, can be understood to still exist, just like non-locality exists, but they exist in non-locality. That your soul exists beyond the rules of this physical universe.
Yeah, so it's not the physics of it, I guess. It's beyond the physics. Or the physical.
Yeah, yeah. Or there's different physics. There's Newtonian physics, which work perfectly well within the context of the physical world. And then there's quantum physics, which does work within the physical world really well, but it also works beyond the physical world. So these kind of building blocks, they're often time consuming to explain. So I don't use them with every meditation class I use, but I do use them a lot. And that the fact that I used them a lot, and the fact that I had built up, 50 years of knowledge of science, particularly of where science and spirituality meet, that crossover point, that's what inspired me to write the book, because there is a huge amount of information. There's a huge amount of solid science, like quantum physics, and including quantum physics, obviously, that support all the things that Eastern spiritual teachers and mystics everywhere, East and West, describe as part of their experience. So it was my hope that that book would allow people to see how science and religion are not in conflict. You have to take science not as what a lot of people, you'll hear this in conversation, a lot of people will say, well, science says X, right? We hear this all the time, and I hear it all the time, and I think I know what they mean, and everyone else sort of knows what they mean. But science doesn't say anything. That's the weird thing. Scientists say things, and they say what fits their interpretation of all the discoveries that have been made by scientists. And so if you can separate the interpretations of scientists from the discoveries of science, and you can understand that, well, quantum physics can be argued by physicists, and often is, to be a great example of how matter and energy interact. And therefore it fits the what's called scientific materialist point of view. But there are also interpretations by reputable scientists and physicists that indicate that quantum physics is really taking you beyond scientific materialism, and it's introducing us to consciousness as a separate reality. So scientific materialists, again, when they think of consciousness, they think of something happening in our brain that's a product of the neurons firing in our brains that create this, and they can't explain how, but they just believe that it must be the case that our brain creates consciousness. And so when you die, your consciousness dies with you. Therefore, there can be no soul, there can be no life after death. It all goes with you when you die. But there, in the teachings of pretty much all experiential spiritual traditions, from Zen to yoga to Sufism, they say consciousness is independent of the body, and that in fact consciousness is the foundation of matter and energy. Quite the opposite from being the product of matter and energy. It actually is the foundation. It creates matter and energy. And you can see how this gets supported again in the discoveries of physicists, counter to the opinions of many physicists that consciousness can't possibly exist. But there is support. So if you can kind of shove aside mentally the scientific materialist interpretation of scientific discoveries, and then put those together with what I call the testimony of the saints, sages, and mystics, not the theology of religions. The theology of religions is sort of the counterpart of the interpretations of scientists. It built up over, thousands of years in some cases, where theologians say, well, what that saint said, or what that mystic said, or what that yogi said really means this.
And yeah, they're explaining something that they haven't had an experience with.
Exactly. But they're confident that they have, because intellect makes us, fools us into thinking we really know more than we do. If we can put together a nice house of cards made out of philosophical concepts, it's very satisfying to the mind. But it can be just that. It can be a house of cards because it's not based on any real foundation of experience. So if you can shove those guys to the other side, if you can shove the theologians to one side and the scientific materialists to the other side, and just compare what the saints and sages, near-death experiencers, mystics said directly about what they experienced and what their teachings are. If you just go direct to that and push away thousands of years of accretions of other opinions, and you put that together with the interpretations of physics from high-minded scientists like Einstein and Bohr and Heisenberg and Fritjof Capra and Amit Goswami and Deepak Chopra, if you put those together, you'll find this amazing congruence. They fit like a glove with each other because they're talking about the same reality. Scientists have to talk about it using experimental results in mathematics. The mystics and saints talk about it often in metaphors or just an attempt to describe something that's really hard to describe. They have to use words as best they can. In many cases, if you read the books, the stories of near-death experiencers, one of the first things they will say, almost in every book, before they describe what they experienced, is to say, words can't describe this. I'm going to do my best to describe this, but words really are inadequate. But here we go. I'll tell you what I experienced. And so we are kind of in that space where, or in that reality, in that situation, in that condition where what the saints and sages say is still not enough for us to really get it. We have to experience it ourselves. We have to practice meditation. But they give you a lot of positive reasons to go and try experience it.
Yeah.
And then you have the scientists who are the open-minded scientists who can see a larger picture than just matter and energy, who say, yes, this fits. Heisenberg, one of my favorite quotes, said that first gulp from the glass of science will make you an atheist, but God is waiting for you at the bottom. If you go deep enough into it, you begin to see the limit that science, as scientific materialism, can go. It just can't explain everything. And the broader pictures of reality that are described by the saints and sages do fit together better to be able to describe your personal experiences, to describe intuition, to describe feeling, to describe how your mind works, none of which can really be described from a strict scientific materialist point of view. Scientific materialists can't tell us how the universe was created. They can't tell us how life began, and they can't tell us how consciousness was created.
No, it confuses them. They recognize the consciousness is there, but they really can't explain it. So
yeah. They try, and they have the confidence that they must be right in their belief in scientific materialism. They have the confidence that it's just a matter of time, right, before all these things are going to be settled. But they've had a fair amount of time. They've had 100 years to try to answer those questions, and they haven't yet.
You say it best, but they have to experience it. And I know through my own experience, there's no way. It's exactly what you said. It's hard to explain those experiences. And one of the quotes I read a couple many years ago that really helped me through that was, for those that believe, no explanation is necessary. For those that don't, no explanation is good enough.
Yeah.
So it really just comes down to, because people have had experience and they can't explain it. And sometimes you think you're crazy when you have some of these experiences, but it's definitely not crazy.
And they're usually hard experiences. They're not mental experiences. They're not like your brain suddenly goes, aha, I get it. It's, you feel it. You have this experience that, is everywhere in your body and in your heart especially, that you just can't deny. You can't explain. Most people can't explain with their mind, with their intellectual thoughts, but you can't deny the experience. And there, stories are rife of people having these powerful conversions, like St. Paul on the way to Damascus, that, he got hit by a lightning bolt and basically was transformed into a different person because of the experience he had. And you read this in near-death experiencers, you read this in, just day-to-day happening in people's lives. Sometimes they're dramatic, sometimes they're very simple, but it has to happen within. And then once it happens within, like you say, no explanation is necessary. You realize it's no longer about what you think about reality. It's experiencing it more directly.
So I just wanted to point out to everybody, this is your book, Physics of God. And then also, I'm sure you've been seeing me post his website, but it's also in the description of the show below. So you can, I'm sure, purchase his book there or on Amazon, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's available in bookstores as well. Obviously, I can't say every bookstore, but it does have a presence in bookstores. If you're still a bookstore-ophile and like to go in and browse around and hold the book before you buy it, so you might find it out there. But certainly most online outlets. It's also available as Kindle, as you would expect, and there's an audiobook, an audible version of it available too on Amazon. More and more people like audible books. I think particularly for these kind of books, where you have a lot of thoughts to kind of travel with as you take your walk or do your chores or whatever it might be. And I don't know this for sure, but I think I've actually sold more audible versions of the book than print versions. So just know that it's there.
And the millennials these days, it was funny, a friend of mine put out a movie called I Gone, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And I listened to the show on it. And one of my friends says, the millennial in me doesn't want to buy a DVD. Can I just download it? And I was like, sure. She goes, we don't do DVDs these days.
Yeah. My son recently told me, this sort of doesn't have anything to do with anything we're talking about, but I found it amusing. He said, you can tell absolutely who is like 25 years or younger by the way they text. They don't use any capitals or any punctuation. And instead of ending a sentence with a period, they just send and then start the next bit of information as a new sentence, and they hit send, and that it's faster. Obviously, it's a very economical way to write. And he said everybody who's over 25 still has kind of trouble with that. They want to put the apostrophe in, they want to put the period in, they want to make a paragraph out of it. So I just found that amusing. That
traumatized by our English and grammar teachers.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, Joseph, thank you so much. Is there any last minute thing that you would like to give the audience before we kind of conclude our show today?
Well, I appreciate everybody listening in, or those of you in the future who tune into this and find it interesting. I would just say, as I said at the beginning of the program, if you don't do anything else, if this book doesn't inspire you or this talk doesn't inspire you to do anything else, meditate. Meditation will change your life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for tuning in as usual. Lots of amazing guests coming on over the next couple weeks. Tune in every week, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Pacific Time. And also check us out on the LA Tribune Roku TV network. Much love, everybody, and have a blessed week.